Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corey Swanson with the John Locke Foundation. It's a pleasure to have you here today for the Milton Friedman Legacy Day celebration. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of events going on around the world today honoring the legacy of Milton Friedman, a true champion of school choice, among other things. Friedman said, "The true test of any scholar's work is not what his contemporaries say, but what happens to his work in the next 25 or 50 years. And the thing that I will really be proud of is if some of the work I have done is still cited in the textbooks long after I'm gone." Milton Friedman's legacy is not limited to just textbooks. It can be seen in the lives of the millions of families who've benefited from his vision of school choice. And indeed, that's what the Friedman Foundation is called, the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. And we are doing this event today in conjunction with the Friedman Foundation, and we appreciate their support throughout the year for many, many things dealing with education choice. We're going to spend a couple days on education choice, as a matter of fact. Our speaker next Monday is Paul Slobodian, and Paul is here in the audience today, and he's going to talk about education warfare, the various things that go on in education policy, the various experiments that have been tried. And Paul penned a op-ed a few weeks ago in the N&O on this topic, and one of the things he said is that there is one reform that works. It has been shown to help public school students by carefully designed studies, and it doesn't cost that much to adopt. The proven reform is to give parents the power to choose where to get their child's education, whether from a neighborhood public school, a parochial school, or a charter school. Only when parents can choose where to spend their tax dollars and public schools experience the need to compete to retain their kids' tax revenue will public schools improve. Well, we have with us today a champion of school choice, Representative Paul Stam, who has been in the legislature for a number of years, and he has been a champion, as I said, of school choice. He has worked tirelessly, and over the years when the Democratic-controlled House and Senate were there, Paul was their voice for school choice. Paul is currently serving his 7th term in the North Carolina House of Representatives. He was first elected that position in 1989 and again in 2003. He has served as the House Republican leader, the House Majority Leader, and as a Speaker pro tem currently. Representative Stam has worked for more freedom and less government in areas like providing school choice, as I've talked about, to empower parents to ensure quality schooling for their children. And so today we thought it would be very appropriate to have Representative Stam come over on this Friedman Legacy Day to talk about what has happened this year in the legislature regarding school choice and what Paul thinks will happen in the coming years. Representative Stam.
I need to put this on, don't I?
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. I like to talk about school choice. It's a very positive subject. I think my first essay on the subject was about in 1996 when I was advocating open enrollment. Just go wherever, like the grocery store. You know, you go whatever grocery store you want to go to. You're not assigned to one, are you? You're not assigned to what lawyer you should have to go to. But I was attacked by that. And this is the days of Jim Hunt, and he kept talking about public education like it's a new 6-syllable word that provides all the education in the world. And I got thinking about that, and of course I remembered some readings I'd done from Milton Friedman, and remembered this quote from him: "Education spending will be most effective if it relies on parental choice and private initiative, the building blocks of success throughout our society." Not because there's anything special about education, but because education responds to the same incentives, disincentives that almost everything else in the world belongs to. Now, I'm assuming that y'all are not beginners in the whole question of school choice, so this will be a lecture for the intermediate or advanced grades. And it'll also have quite a bit to do with the history of school choice in the legislature in the last few years, just because I may shed some light on that, and prospects for the future. I'm going to begin with a parable from the book of Matthew, but in this particular case, it's not for any theological or spiritual reason, but just as a a device so I can organize my talk, and a mnemonic device so you can remember what I said. So you're familiar with this parable. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. When the sun came up, the plants were scorched. They withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. So I sort of organized what I'd like to say based on 4 kinds of soil. 3 soils that are bad soil and 1 that's good. Early on, and let's just talk about why sometimes there's no market for school choice. I filed a bill, I think it was in 2005, that would have given a couple $1,000s as a personal refundable tax credit to homeschool, private school, anybody. And I thought that was pretty cool. Had a few problems. It would have cost about $300 million to fund. It excited only the opposition, got a big yawn from the private schools, got active opposition from homeschools because they thought somebody was out to regulate them, which we never intended. At that time we had just really rocky soil. That comes because in many cases, parents, particularly in the mountains, but also particularly in some rural areas and some suburbs, think that the public education their children receive is just fine and there is no need for competition. My children attended a total of like 20 of 3 of their 24 years of education, K-12 education in public school. They both went to Apex High, which was ranked right at the top of Wake County, and Wake County was right at the top of the state on all these rankings. But my son got the Rip Van Winkle Award for sleeping through first period every day. And my children, not once in those 8 years of high school, ever had to do a term paper. Can you imagine? The standards by which most parents judge their local public school is pretty low. And frankly, one of the good things, if it can be said, about Common Core is that the standards are higher, and if they had produced the actual test results coming from this last year of teaching based on Common Core, it would have shown almost all schools in North Carolina getting C's, D's, or F's because the lack of rigor of the public school education. Especially in rural areas where the school, and especially the mountain, the West, where the school is more than just an educational institution. It is also the sports team. It's the cultural center where you go to watch the school play. It's where you have barbecue fundraisers. And who wants to upset that? Now, we've done a lot of polling. We've had applications for opportunity scholarships, and they are that is not the case in urban areas, most suburban areas where people socialize elsewhere and realize they need choices. But that is a problem in the early years of a lot of people just don't think they need choices. Or some rural communities say, well, there are no private schools in our county, which is probably true in a half dozen counties. So what good does an opportunity scholarship make? By the way, we have handouts for you that completely describe the program, some recent amendments. I'm not telling you to look at it now, but I'm not going to give all the details of the program, assuming that you can read or that you have kept up in the newspapers. It's not just the suburban mom or dad who thinks that their kid is getting a great education. They also tend to think that if their kid is getting a great education, and we're spending a lot more in the rural areas anyway, everybody must be getting a great education. That's a problem for school choice if they don't see a need for it. So that's why some seeds fell along the path early and just died. There was not understanding that there was a need for it. By the way, just to put this in context, there's about 100,000 students in private schools today, about 60,000 homeschools with about 80,000 homeschool students. There's also a lot of charter schools, but that's a totally different animal. We'll talk about that another time. They're public schools that are organized in a better way. Now let's talk about the rocky ground. Doesn't have much soil, springs up quickly, dies as soon as the sun comes up. After about 4 years of trying to move this ball forward, I finally got some top Democrats to join me as co-sponsors of a special needs tax credit. One of the reasons for doing that is the argument against the pure opportunity scholarship or tax credit or voucher was that we would skim the cream of the crop from the public school. This would just, y'all heard that term? I never quite understood it, but I heard it. So we said, okay, since you're afraid that we're going to leave behind all the poor and the handicapped, we'll have our next bill for special needs, disabled, the current term is special needs children. Got a couple of senior Democrats in favor of it. We had a hearing in the Education Committee. Actually, it passed the House Education Committee 2007 and was coming back for another hearing in 2008. It was scheduled for Monday afternoon for a vote, 2008, summer. That weekend, 2008, Bev Perdue made a speech to the North Carolina Bar Association in which she had about one paragraph on this terrible bill to take all the money from the public schools and give it to private schools. All our support from the Democrats evaporated, and they were going into election and they had to follow their leader. Politics can intervene. I don't quite understand their politics because the bill that they abandoned polls at about 85%. It polls at about 85% among Democrats. It polls about 85% amongst African Americans, but yet politics intervenes, and that can happen. 2012, we actually had a bill come up with a tax credit for the poor. If you can't get it for, well, actually 2011 we did get the first version of the special needs tax credit, and we're in version 3.0 right now, which should make it much more user-friendly. Thank you to Amy, Kristen, wave your hands, who are my entourage on that subject. Say hello to Jamie and Ann, who also are helping. Hi, okay. But these two got this bill straight, so it'll be very easy for parents. And the only reason I mention it, it's not opportunity scholarships, special needs scholarships, it's not income limited, is we had to do that first to avoid the skimming the cream argument. Got it? Okay, with us. Okay. Some seed falls on grounds and thorns come up that choke the plants that are there. There are a lot of those. For example, in the early years, we had some proponents of school choice, of which I'm one, that says it should have nothing really to do with income. No matter what your income, you're saving the public schools a lot of money. So why shouldn't you get a benefit if you take your kids to private school? But we had others that said only if this is limited to the poor, and then it had to be really poor. This year it's free and reduced price lunch. Next year it'll be 133% of that So my goal is to move it up so gradually it applies to almost everybody. But guess what I found out in the assembly? You don't always get your way. And I had to swallow hard when they limited it really strongly by income, and then also really limited the amount of money for the first year. Thorns can come up. Then you have people that just don't understand religious freedom. You have the left that thinks if I give money to poor Debbie Clary for food stamps, been a while since you've been on food stamps, Debbie, and she takes that money to buy groceries at the Winn-Dixie, that I'm subsidizing the Winn-Dixie. No, actually, I'm subsidizing her so she can eat. But these people think if we give you $4,000 to go to Raleigh Christian Academy, when the cost is even more than that, and what we spend in public school is $9,000 a year per kid, that I'm subsidizing the school. No, I'm subsidizing the parent who is making a choice with the child. So the left just goes crazy. Now, their craziness is selective, because we've been doing the same thing for 40 years in higher education. It used to be called the legislative tuition grant. Now it's need-based. 35 colleges and universities, private schools, have been accepting this money, about $2,000 or $3,000 per North Carolina student. So their outrage is very selective. And we've been doing it for about 15 years at pre-K, called More at 4, Smart Start, NC Pre. Y'all ever heard of those? Which are voucher programs where the money goes, in many cases, to private schools. So they're very selective. But then you have people, I won't say on the right because there's nothing right about it, who say, I heard that of the 200 schools that have qualified, that 2 of them are Muslim. And we can't be subsidizing these Muslims. And about 3 or 4% of all the kids who apply will be going to a Muslim school, but they just happen to be concentrated in 2 schools, which means that they're at the top of the list. And it's not only people who don't understand religious freedom who complain about that. It is also one of the lawyers for the plaintiffs emphasizes in court this Islamic school so that that will get out, so he can stir up religious bigotry against it. And one of the other lawyers for the plaintiffs in private talks up in the mountains, did you know that one of the schools getting the money will be Muslim? You know, as if that could turn a mountain legislator against something. But that was somebody you all know who was one of the plaintiffs. And then you have June Atkinson. I have to quote this. With the voucher legislation that we have, we could be in dangerous territory as far as taxpayers' dollars going to private schools. There is nothing in the legislation that would prevent someone from establishing a school of terror. Now, it is true that there is nothing in that legislation that would prevent anybody from starting a school of terror. But there are hundreds of laws outside the legislation that would stop that. So she must mean that it's not that it's the private school, it's getting the public money to finance terrorism. But there are hundreds, there are 700 public high schools that get taxpayer money. Does she have any information that any of them are promoting terror, teaching terror, or engaging in terror? So I made the often quoted on the internet remark that she should tend to her own knitting. And I was roundly berated for that being a supposed sexist comment, but it actually, knitting didn't start with the women. Knitting is a equal opportunity subject. And I believe tending to your own knitting actually comes from Shakespeare, but my staff was unable to find the relevant quote. Okay. There are, and then as part of these thorns and thistles that come up, lawsuits. Now, this lawsuit isn't going to win. Some states it wins because they have what's called a Blaine Amendment, which we have never had. They don't even bother to sue under the U.S. Constitution because the federal courts have allowed this kind of thing so many times in so many places. They don't even bother. Instead, they read parts of the state constitution and just commit one logical fallacy after another. I'm not going to go through them just because it would be somewhat tedious, but they don't know how to read the Constitution. Fortunately, yesterday in court, Judge Hobgood refused to enjoin it, the distribution of money. So his little decision about the case will come after the money's out the door, and there's very little they can do about it for the first year. Nevertheless, even though they will lose, it is a big problem because they filed their suit, they waited around for, why did they wait for 6 months? They waited so they could file their suit so it could be heard right during the application process, so that students and parents who heard about the lawsuit would be discouraged from applying. Nevertheless, over 5,000 parents or students, I don't know the number of parents, but there are like 5,055 applications, of which about 4,000 turned out to be eligible. Nevertheless, more applied than we had room for. But they were then put in limbo for months while the case worked its way through the courts, and that was the exact purpose of the lawsuit, in my opinion. They may have a secondary purpose of maybe winning by some stroke of luck, but they will lose at that. Their purpose was to disrupt the process as much as possible, and they did that. A lot of the parents, by the time the awards went out, the lottery was created, which was necessary. A lot of the parents said, we've already made plans for next year. It's too late in July to make plans for August. I wish you had told us about this in March. We could have done it. So the new legislation, which is on your desk, allows the extra money to be used. There will be some extra money to be used for second semester, people who want to get into that. We will need a lot of help next year because this is an appropriation and people will be applying in February not knowing how much will be appropriated in the future. Now, those are the bad soil, the birds, the thorns, but what is the promise of the good soil? First of all, it takes cultivating by such groups as the Locke Foundation, Parents for Educational Freedom, many others. It also takes time. The special needs tax credit in 2011 got some bipartisan support. In 2013, when we changed it to a grant program, it got even more. This year, when we reformed it and made it more user-friendly, I believe it was unanimous in the Senate, and only a few people voted against us. In other words, with acceptance, with a face on the people receiving it, we will get more and more support. I believe that's true of Opportunity Scholarships. What will be the result? First, private schools will be better. They'll be more diverse. They'll be on a sounder financial basis because more people can afford to go to them. And public schools will be better. I think in your packet of information, we have some information from the Friedman Foundation about the effect on public schools of competition. Now, in our polling, the polling that I've seen, a plurality of North Carolina parents actually would prefer to go to private schools, to send their kids that way, about 41%. I don't actually think it'll go that far. Currently it's at homeschool plus private schools about 10%. Is that right? of the 1.5 million public school students. But I think sometimes it will get up to 20, 25%. And when you have that much of a, help me with the words here, that much competition, but you have a critical mass of viable other schools that can be attended. At that point, the public schools have to compete because they have no more captive audience. And they will then improve themselves so that it would not surprise me if it sort of bottomed out or flattened out at 20, 25, 30% going elsewhere. It is only the tyranny of the status quo that leaves us to take it for granted that in schooling, government monopoly is the best way for the government to achieve its objective. I'm for ending that monopoly and getting competition with good education quality. I think we have time for some questions and answers. Short questions get short answers, and then when I should end, you say this is the last question. Okay? Barry Smith.
How do you see, I mean, do you see Judge Hopgood actually reversing himself totally next month when he, when he has some...
I don't know what he will do, but here's what he said in court yesterday when considering their motion just to stop dispersing until his hearing. Amy, quote him.
He said he's read a lot of Supreme Court opinions in the past, and they don't issue a lot of opinions, and since they took the step to overturn the first injunction, he wasn't going to issue the second one. So he thinks they're giving him a clue about what the North Carolina Supreme Court would do in the end. So.
That's what he said. I think if he declares unconstitutional, this time he'll stay his judgment until appeals are, because whatever you want to say about Judge Hopgood, he's a very thorough, experienced judge, and he doesn't like to be reversed. Dr. Monteith.
Thank you. You touched on the fact that education really is tied, the success of it is tied to culture of the state. And in some parts of our state, I'm born in the mountains, I come from the hills, and I visit times, and that culture is not changing very rapidly toward education. Now, how does this reach into that part of our state? How do we get the culture to value education in a different way? One point, my aunt really gave me a lot of, well, my mind's not working. I gave a talk up there one time about value of education, and her view was, if they get too educated, they're going to leave us. And they did not want to lose those children.
Yeah. Well, there's some truth in that. If they're educated, they might leave. We have about 40 counties losing population. Do the best we can. I don't have a magic bullet for that.
But it seems to me that with the internet and everything we have today going for us, that we ought to be able to find ways to get into those all areas of our state.
Right.
The value
Right.
on the culture.
I agree with you that the difference between very rural areas and city areas is going to become less and less and less and less because of the internet.
That raises the issue of doing distance education over the internet.
That's what we're talking about, distance education. And my opinion is, and I don't really know this for a fact, is that much of your education can be distance education, but not all of it. You need interaction with students and live teachers to sharpen your ability to think. But we certainly can do a lot more than we do. Mr. Frank Johnson.
Skip back
In some form, I'm thinking about 15 or 20 in some form. And it's growing. It'll. Debbie Clary.
Thank you, Representative B. Just to follow up on some of what you're talking about and what the legislature's done to try to expand it in some of the western parts of the state, we have 42 counties that don't have choice and don't have charter schools. And that's something that the Charter Accelerator is something that we've been working on, trying to get charter schools in there. Inside the budget, there's also a pilot for virtual schools. And I think that will push us into a time when education can reach us, those of us that live in the West.
Of course, distance is no excuse. We still have books.
We just don't have choice.
Well, we got to be able to read them.
Right.
What's your sense about the support within the General Assembly? It's obviously in the early days for choice scholarships, not that much. It's pretty strong now, or is it very?
Good question. How much actual support is there? You know, please understand this. There's a difference between what people put down on a survey that they send to an interest group and how they actually vote. But there's even a bigger difference between what they put down on a survey and what they say privately in a caucus. Like, you know, someone all in favor of school choice and put it down in caucus, they said, well, we need to go slow on that. Let's do that next year. Let's do it 10 million instead of 40 million. And they find that to be totally consistent with their public surveys. So you understand what I'm saying? It's not sufficient to get the name on a survey. You actually need to convince them that this is something worth doing. And I believe as it's in operation, there will be more support. So for example, we had several votes, but in 2013, the critical vote, we won 42 to 54 on the Haynes Amendment. And we lost 10 Republicans voted no. This time it was only 4 Republicans voted no. And we went from 1 to 2 Democrats. So progress. And on the special needs scholarship, progress every year as they begin to see actual people involved. And the experience in other states, especially in the African American community, is huge opposition to start with, but by the time they see how good it is for their kids, they come around and vote for it. This happened, I know it happened in Florida, Georgia, many other states, because realistically, they're the ones being ripped off the most by the current public education establishment. And when they see there's a realistic choice, they say, let's get my kid in there. Yes, sir.
One of the concerns you always hear from the private educators is that accepting state money or having some tie-in with public funding is the eventual encroachment with regulations and so forth. Now, I know this is one of the parents, but is there some...
That's the question for the tape is the fear of regulation of private schools. And it's a legitimate fear, and it was one of my drop-dead things. If this starts regulating curriculum or teacher qualifications or teacher experience, we're not going to do it. We'll just drop it. And the regulations here are very minimal. And if, another biblical passage, the first chapter of Daniel, I don't even have to tell you the story because you all know it. But let's test and see if the education works. So we do have testing requirements, but the tests themselves can be chosen by the private school, and they can also choose the cutoff scores. And they've been doing that now for 25 years anyway. The only difference is the scores for these kind of students will be aggregated, and we'll eventually see how they're doing compared to how they used to do. We did add in one non-discrimination clause, and it was acceptable to the leaders of all the private schools that I talk with, and that's prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. But they're free to discriminate on the basis of religion or single-sex schools or discipline or anything related to curriculum or belief. Just those first three are immutable characteristics that have nothing to do with anything or have nothing to do with education. And we agreed to add that in just to lay that argument to the ground, because the plaintiffs were all the time saying, well, you could just, you could refuse admission to somebody based on race, and the school could still get this money. Well, no. Yes, sir. Oh.
I'm wondering about the opposition that you're facing here. I can think of two things right off the bat. One is the Common Core. People who believe in this, it might not be compatible with the Common Core, because not all private schools go to this.
Some private schools use it. Some hate it. There are hundreds of private schools who signed up, and they're all varied on that.
Well, if you're really for Common Core, as some of your opposition might be, could that be one of the bases for opposing?
That was never mentioned. No, the curriculum opposition was on the grounds that we have no way of ensuring that you're actually being taught, science or whatever. And I said to them, let's see, we have 43 public high schools accredited by SACS that were declared to be committing academic genocide. And you want to question the private schools? Give me a break. Yes, ma'am. Brittany.
You had mentioned the opposition early on from homeschoolers, and I was just wondering, that particular group, have you seen a difference?
Well,
Is there a
yeah.
group?
The thing about homeschoolers is they're all independent, right? And they have hundreds of different groups and hundreds of different opinions. That was the first year when I did that kind of credit, 2005 or 7. The special needs scholarship does apply to homeschoolers, and a lot of them really appreciate it, and we've gotten no opposition from homeschoolers to that, except, why doesn't my kid qualify? Okay, I have to explain that in case you don't understand this. To do what we really want to do would cost about $1 billion a year. That is, just pay for everybody's private education up to a certain amount. So the only way to afford it is to phase it in, like beginning with kindergarten and people who switch from public to private. Because if you're already in a private school and you get the money, that's a big cost. But if you switch, that's a save. So you have to balance the costs with the saves and phase it in. So we've gotten love letters from some people on the special needs scholarship who said the greatest thing ever happened to their kid. Can they give us, hugs and kisses? And we also get hate mail from them. Why can't I get it? I say, well, if I were the dictator of the world, you'd get it. But I have to operate in a political environment where it does not come out of Medicaid or public education or the universities. I have to operate in an environment where it pays for itself, which it does, but only if you phase it in. Mitch.
Someone may hear that recording and say, Skip Stam wants to spend $1 billion on private schools. If you got all that you wanted, what would you end up saving taxpayers to spend now?
Well, as I say, it's currently about 10%. Suppose we went up to 20%. So in big numbers, our education budget for K-12 is $8 billion. So that'd save about $800 million a year for the state. Yes, sir. And then I see the last question coming up. Barry?
On that same line, have you looked at how much potential savings there is for county commissioners who may not have to build extra school buildings because these folks are not only in public schools?
Yes, and let's take Wake County. For how many of y'all in Wake County? Okay. We have 3,000 or 4,000 new students every year. Under this program, when it's mature, we'll have about 1,000 fewer per year to build schools for. So it saves growing counties a lot of money. And in several of our earliest bills, we also allowed county commissioners to supplement the credit by an extra 500 or 1,000 based on higher cost of living for that very reason. Again, once they make me dictator, we can add that back in. But it wasn't too popular.